How are we looking? Check 1, 2. Audio looks good. All right. Today, we're talking about IFR cross-country planning. Making sure everything looks good. Yeah, cool. All right. All right, here's the battle plan. We'll start with a short introduction. We'll get into the topic of the day, which is IFR cross-country flight planning, and I'll have a section in the end towards the end to do Q&As. If you have any questions, I'll have the thing up so I can see your comments. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Okay, let's start with an introduction. Who am I? My name is Monty. I'm a flight instructor, ground instructor, instrument advanced, and I'm working on building my flight instructor instrument lesson plans. So today we're going to cover some IFR cross-country flight planning. I founded Emerald Squadron Aviation, and my whole passion is just helping you earn your wings. So if you want to become a pilot, I'm your guy. Okay, so cross-country flight planning. What's the objective? To develop knowledge of the elements related to developing an IFR cross-country flight plan. If nothing else, I want you to get these three things out of it: the applicable IFR regulations, choosing an appropriate course or altitude, and then how to file a flight plan. Now, here are the elements we're going to cover: IFR regulatory requirements, estimated time and route and fuel requirements, your en route charts, DPs, stars, and instrument approach charts, NOTAMs, IFR flight plan, the control sequence, GPS and RAIM, VOR minimum operating network, and airframe icing. Now, why do we care? Well, quite frankly, you cannot operate in instrument meteorological conditions without an IFR flight plan and without a clearance from ATC. You'll make this guy grouchy. Look at me, so grouchy. So yeah, if you want to fly in IFR conditions, you have to file an IFR flight plan and receive a clearance. Let's talk about those regulatory requirements. Now, 91.103 is a great regulation, even for VFR pilots, and I use that Northwest Craft Checklist. If you fly with me, you know that every time we go fly, I run through that Northwest Craft Checklist. And that stands for NOTAMs, weather, known ATC delays, runways, alternates, fuel, and takeoff and landing distance calculations. Let's start from the top. Now, NOTAMs, these are notices to air missions, and you can get them with your flight plan when you get a weather brief, and there are other different ways to get them as well. But usually these two, I pair them together because they flow well with each other. Now, weather, if you file or create a flight plan in ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, or 1-800 Weather Brief, they will give you a weather brief, and you can interpret it. And I like to do it a lot. I fly quite a bit. So after 5 flights a day for months, you start to really understand how weather works. So I would recommend, maybe once a day, go practice creating a flight plan and go interpret the weather. It would be a really good use of your time, especially if you want to be an instrument pilot. Now, known ATC delays. This is anything that's delaying aircraft in the National Airspace System. And you can go to the nasstatus.faa.gov to find those delays. And they display it both graphically as a map and as a list. And you can see why there are things, why aircraft are being delayed in the airspace. Next are runways, your lengths, widths, composition, and just making sure that your runways are good to go. And you can do that in ForeFlight, SkyVector, the chart supplement. Those are great ways to get it. Then your alternates. Now, in VFR world, your alternates are pretty straightforward. If I'm going from one place to another, I'm going to pick a couple of alternates on route, so I know my next out. I might even use my alternates as my route rather than just going direct to the destination. Now, in IFR conditions, or in IFR world, there are actually some additional requirements for choosing your alternate. First of all, there's the 1-2-3 rule. That means that from 1 hour before to 1 hour after your planned arrival, you need to have 2,000-foot ceilings and 3 miles visibility. If you don't have that, then you're required to have an alternate. And then the alternates themselves have their own additional requirements. So if you are listing an airfield that has a precision approach, you need 600-foot ceilings and 2 miles of visibility. And if you're listing a non-precision approach, or an airfield with a non-precision approach, then you need to have 800-foot ceilings and 2 miles of visibility at the time you expect to be arriving at your alternate. And then if you are listing an alternate that only is VFR, then you must your weather brief must say that you will be expecting VFR conditions and be able to make a VFR approach to that airfield when you get there. That's the 1, 2, 3 rule in IFR flying. And then there's fuel. You need to be able to get to your destination and then fly to your alternate, and then an additional 45 minutes at cruise. Now in VFR, we would just need that additional 30 minutes at cruise. So get to your destination and then plus 30 minutes of loader time. But in IFR, you need more fuel because you don't really, you got to have the amount of fuel you need to loiter or to go hold or try to figure out what's going on with your aircraft. And then finally, your takeoff and landing distance calculations. Now, if you're a VFR pilot already, you know where to find those. That's in the POH. Go, find the appropriate chart. Plug in your density altitude or your pressure altitude and temperature and figure out how much runway you need to take off and land. Pretty straightforward. Now, I do this in VFR conditions too. IFR conditions just have additional stipulations like that 1, 2, 3 rule for your alternates. All right, so let's talk about IFR regulatory requirements. CFR 91.173 says you may not operate in controlled airspace under IFR unless you have filed a flight plan and received appropriate clearance from ATC. So you can't just, go fly like you can in VFR. Technically, you can, once you receive your clearance, take off in 0-0. That means zero visibility and zero ceilings. But it's one of those things, if you can take off from the field but you can't land in it, are you being safe? So it's recommended that you use your published approach mins as a guideline. Oh, that reminds me. Sorry, I just remembered. Going back to the alternates here. Alternates can also have additional rules and, or minimums based on the approach plate. So again, that 1, 2, 3 rule says that from 1 hour before to 1 hour after, you need to have 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. And for a precision versus non-precision approach, there's 800 foot ceilings or 600 foot ceilings and 2 statute miles visibility. Well, if there is an alternate little symbol in the approach plate, then you need to have, then there are alternate minimums for that airfield, and you need to go study it in the appropriate publication. Okay, so 0-0 takeoffs are technically legal, but it would be wise to use the published airport mins as a guideline to determine whether or not you want to depart in low visibility like that. Now let's talk about en route. In Class A airspace, and you'll remember this from your VFR days, you must be on an IFR flight plan and you have to have a clearance to operate in Class A airspace. Obviously, that doesn't change, especially now that we're moving on to instrument conditions. Class B, now you must also have a VOR or TACAN in your aircraft. And let's talk about your mins, or your altitudes now. I'm going to change to a different color. I don't like that color. So there's the MEA and the MOCA. The MEA is the minimum en route altitude, and the MOCA is the minimum or obstruction clearance altitude. So basically, unless you're taking off or landing, or shooting an approach, you should be at or above your minimum en route altitude or your minimum obstruction clearance altitude. And your approach, or correction, your low en route charts will tell you your altitudes or what altitude you need to fly at, right? Now, if you're not on an airway, then you've got some additional regulations here. If you're flying over mountainous terrain, you must be 2,000 feet the highest obstacle within a 4 nautical mile radius. And if it's non-mountainous, then it needs to be 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a 4 nautical mile radius. Now, you can technically fly below an MEA, but you cannot fly below a MOCA within 22 nautical miles. So within 22 nautical miles of the VOR. Now, the MEA guarantees reception and obstruction clearance, but the MOCA only guarantees obstruction clearance. So just be aware of that. And similar to VFR flying, if you are flying from 0 to 179 degrees, then you must fly at an odd 1,000. In VFR, we would add 500 feet to that, but in IFR, it's odd 1,000 foot MSL altitude. And 180 to 359, it's an even 1,000. So if you split up, generally speaking, east, you need to be odd 1,000, and in VFR, it would be an additional 500. And then if you're heading generally west, it's going to be even 1,000 feet. And in VFR, you would add 500, not IFR. All right, so let's talk about your course to be flown. You must be on a route along the center line of the airway. So basically what they're saying is they don't want you deviating from the airway if you're flying en route, right? You want to get to your destination and don't dawdle, right? Get on that airway, stay in the center line. And the same goes for if you're not going on an airway, you're just going direct to a waypoint. They want you to fly direct there unless they give you some vectors. So don't dawdle. Let's see. IFR communications. You must report the following: your time and altitude passing each designated reporting point or any point specified by ATC, unless you're on radar contact, and then you don't really have to report those unless specifically requested by ATC. You must also report any unforecasted weather and anything related to the safety of the flight. So if you're flying and you're expecting VFR conditions and all of a sudden there's a giant thunderstorm, be a bro and let your other fellow pilots know. Tell ATC, file a PIRAP, let them know that there's some additional weather that you weren't expecting. Now let's talk about restricted areas. Typically, if it's not active, ATC will give you a vector either to fly through it if they're allowed to, or around it. Basically ATC should be vectoring you around any restricted airspace unless they have permission to vector you through it. MOAs, those are military operational areas. You may also be cleared through it if IFR separation can be provided. Now let's talk about time en route and fuel requirements. Just like in VFR, you should be calculating your altitudes, your fuel burn, time to target, that kind of stuff. Now in IFR, we're gonna have procedures for basically every phase of the flight. On the ground, we've got our airport diagram. As we depart, we have a departure procedure. When we fly, long distance, we'll use that low en route chart. And then to get into the area, we'll use a star or an arrival route or standard terminal arrival route. And then to shoot and approach and land, we'll use an instrument approach procedure. And then, of course, we'll break out that airport diagram again. So basically, anytime you're flying an IFR, you're going to have some chart or some visual representation of what you should be doing, what your route should be doing. All right. Of course, you want to choose the appropriate altitude minimum. So you want to use either these, the MEAs or the MOCAs. If you should also consider whether or not your airplane can climb up to that altitude, and if it's safe to climb up to that altitude. Remember that icing is bad, and if you have visible moisture and near freezing temperatures, then you can develop structural icing, and that's not good for you. You need to determine whether or not you can make it to your destination based on the amount of fuel that you've got, and consider your oxygen requirements. Remember, at 12,500, if you're up there for more than 30 minutes, you need oxygen. At 14,000, the crew needs to be on oxygen the entire time you're at that altitude. And at 15,000 feet, everybody in the aircraft must be provided with oxygen. Excuse me. Okay, so like I said, in IFR conditions in the IFR world, we have plates for just about everything, and you guys know what an airport diagram looks like. But this is a departure procedure, and this tells us how to safely leave the airfield, how to depart, and it's pretty straightforward. Let's see if I can zoom in a little. Yeah, you read it from the top and verify you're on the right at the right airfield, and it's an active or a current chart. You don't want to be using old stuff. Don't pull out a chart from 2015 or something, or 1985. Come up here. These are your weather or your radio frequencies in the order that you're likely going to need them: ATIS, clearance delivery, ground control, pain tower, and then departure. And it gives you a graphical depiction of your route, some takeoff minimums, and then your route in English or written out. For example, if we're departing runway 343. Runway 34 left, will fly on a heading of 343, or as assigned for radar vectors to join the assigned route. Maintain your assigned altitude, expect your filed altitude 5 minutes after departure. And here's the important part: lost communications. What do you do if you lose your radio or if you can't get in contact with Seattle Approach? Well, this is what you do. If not in contact with Seattle Approach upon reaching 2,000, continue to climb to your assigned altitude and proceed direct back to the Payne VOR and then via your assigned route. So you would think, oh, well, if I lose comms, I'll just go to where I need to go. No, you need to depart, come back to the Payne VOR, and then go to your route. Now, once you've departed the field, then you can switch to the low en route chart and basically use your highway in the sky to navigate. And here, Vector 287 is a nice one. We'll go to RP, at 3,000, and then at 6,000, and then we'll fly around. But your low en route chart is really your highway chart, your highway in the sky chart. VORs are really important. Yeah. Now, when you're ready to start coming home or descending to your destination, you can fly an arrival. So again, airport diagram to taxi, departure procedure, your en route procedures, and your arrival. You're getting in the area, getting close, but not quite ready to land. Now, just like the departure, you read from the top. All right, Bellingham, Washington, Roger. It's good until from October 5th to November 2nd, 2023. So if that's still good, then we're good. And so you can start at Payne, and you can see it shows your waypoints listed graphically. You've got your radio frequencies all on the right side here, notes that you might need to read, and depending on what you're planning on doing, like if you're landing on runway 16, they want you to fly a route. If you're landing on 34, they want you to fly another route, right? So let's say, for the sake of consistency with our winds, we're landing on runway 34. From Maddie, that's this waypoint here, on track 322 degrees to cross Tub T, that's your next waypoint, at or above 3,000 and at 210,000. Then on track 344, expect the RNAV for runway 34 approach or radar vectors to final approach course. And again, what happens if you lose your comms? If you're landing on runway 16 after Yusaki, conduct the RNAV Zulu runway 16 approach. If unable, proceed to Yano, maintain 2000, and proceed to Tekov and hold. And if you're landing here at CYXX, somewhere in Canada, after Yano, maintain 2000 and proceed to Tekov and hold. Okay, but the point of this is how you get into the airport environment, how to get to the airport area to set yourself up for the approach. And here's your approach plate. Just like before, read the approach, make sure you're at the right airfield, and it's a valid or up-to-date chart. Now your localizer DME frequency is up here, the approach course, and some information about the runway, field, and altitude. Here are your non-standard takeoff and alternate minimums, like I said earlier. Here's a note, DME or radar is required. And here's some notes that are definitely worth reading. And you want to read this ahead of time. You don't want to be briefing this approach on short final 3 miles out from the field, right? You want to have this briefed before you even depart, so you know you have a general idea of what you're going to be doing. And it says, for in-op ALS, increase the S localizer category C and D visibility runway visual range 6,000. And CPUM fix minimums, S localizer 16 cat C and D to runway visual range 5,500. Basically, it's saying if some component of the approach system is down, you need to increase your minimums, and your minimums are down here to the appropriate minimums, right? So read this. If it applies to you, make sure you increase your minimums. Here's the lighting situation at the field. What to do if you need to go mist. So basically, if you go around in the VFR equivalent, climb to 700, then a climbing right turn to 2000 on a heading of 275, and on the VOR DME on the 135 radial to Tekov, 15.3 DME and hold. Here are your radio frequencies in the order you're likely to need them, and here's a visual depiction of what you are expected to do. Here's the Whatcom VOR, the radio frequency. Anything that says IAF is an initial approach fix, and that's where you basically start the approach. Here's the holding pattern. We would fly a heading of 164 to the runway, and then this intersection CPUM is 2.5, or this waypoint is 2.5 DME away, and here's the localizer 108.5. That's the frequency, right? And so that's a top-down view of the approach. Now this is a sideways view, or if you're looking like from the ground, looking at an airplane landing. Here are your altitudes. You must be above 2,000 and below 4,600. Coming into CCOG, it's 12.9 DME away from the localizer. You'll hold 2,000 feet at least. Then you intercept the final approach the final approach course here, and then descend down to the appropriate minimums based on your airspeeds. And these categories are based on your approach speeds and what type of approach you're flying. An ILS, localizer, circling. If you're using CPUM fixed minimums, DME is required. And here are your the type of approach and the minimums. And then a top-down view of the airfield. Okay, so the point of today isn't really to talk about approach plates. It's just kind of get an idea of, what have I done? Just to kind of get an idea how each one works in the instrument environment. Now, when you are planning your flight, just like in VFR, you want to choose the appropriate power settings, calculate your time to target, time to altitude, cruise, time to descent. Give yourself extra mins for taxi and stuff like that. And don't forget the legal minimums. Oh, that's not white. Don't forget the legal minimums. You need additional fuel based on your cruise settings. Also, I had AI generate these images. I love how many goggles they have. More goggles make you a better pilot. Okay. So we talked about our Enroute charts, DP, stars, and instrument approaches. Make sure they are current. Read the NOTAMs, because some NOTAMs might say, hey, this approach isn't authorized. And use the FAA chart user's guide if you have any questions. Now let's just quickly review the E6B, the wind side of it. I know some of you guys don't like it. I think it's awesome. So first, we're going to put our grommet on 100, and that's our 0 mark. Then we're going to turn our true index to the wind direction and make a pencil mark on the wind velocity. Then we're going to turn to the course that we want to fly and put the pencil mark on the airspeed that we want to fly. In this case, we're flying on a heading of 160, and we want to fly at 110 knots. Now, the grommet will give you your airspeed, and the pencil mark will give you the wind correction. And remember, we are in the center, and if the wind is blowing us from right to left, we're going to be blown off course this direction. So we need to turn into the wind to account for that wind. So we would add our wind correction. And don't forget to verify whether or not you're using true or magnetic headings, and just make sure that your units match, and then use the magnetic variation. And just because we should review it, remember that true north and magnetic north are not co-located. And so that magnetic variation is the angular difference between true north and magnetic north. And we need to account for it wherever you're flying. And it'll be different at different parts of the planet. Now let's talk about NOTAMs. We reviewed NOTAMs a little bit, but let's actually get into it. NOTAMs are notices to air missions, and they come in different flavors. They might tell you different things like closed runways, closed taxiways, instrument approach procedure changes, security, that kind of stuff. And there are also international NOTAMs that will be published in the ICAO format, and they aren't typically included in a weather brief unless you specifically request international NOTAMs. There can also be military and domestic NOTAMs and GPS NOTAMs. Short version, notices to air missions are notifications to you as the pilot saying, hey, there's something that has changed or something weird going on that didn't make it into the publication, so be aware of it. Also, look, AI-generated puppy flying an airplane. Amazing. Love it. All right, let's talk about filing an IFR flight plan. Like we said before, you must file and receive clearance before entering controlled airspace under instrument conditions. And so probably a good idea to learn how to do that. So your flight plan, you can file it from ForeFlight, and honestly, that's probably one of the easiest ways to do it. But the old school way is like calling up 1-800-WEATHERBRIEF or filing it online through 1-800-WEATHERBRIEF.com. You start here with your aircraft ID, what kind of flight you're flying, so IFR versus VFR, general aviation, number of aircraft, the type of aircraft, the type of wake turbulence, any equipment that you have on board, where you're departing from, when you are leaving, what your airspeed is, what you plan to fly at, your altitude that you plan, your first altitude that you plan to cruise on, any surveillance equipment you have like ADS-B, your route of flight. This is neat actually. You can tap on this and it'll give you suggested or preferred routing, and I use this. You can also tap on the map and see what it looks like visually as well. You can tap, type in any other information, what your destination is, how long you plan on flying, where your alternate is, how much fuel you plan on carrying, the number of people on board, aircraft color, and pilot contact information, and of course anything else here that you find useful or you find a need to include. And then you can get your route brief and interpret that weather briefing and review the NOTAMs. So before you go fly, you should file your flight plan at least 30 minutes prior. That gives them time, ATC time, to receive it and put it into the system. On the ground, you can file it through 1-800-weatherbrief.com or by calling 1-800-WXBrief. You can also file it on ForeFlight or any other flight planning app that you might have, like Garmin Pilot. In the air, you can file with the nearest flight service station or with an Enroute traffic control center, like if you need a pop-up clearance. Remember to stay clear. If you haven't been on a flight plan, you're just flying VFR and you're like, oh, the weather's come in and I should probably file IFR. You need to stay out of the conditions, the weather, until you receive that clearance. Now, if you are visual, if you're like, all right, cool, the weather's gone, I'm totally visual now, I don't feel like dealing with ATC, you can cancel your IFR flight plan in flight. A couple things. You have to be outside Class A airspace to do that, so below 18,000. You have to be outside of the weather or instrument meteorological conditions, and you can cancel with the tower or through ATC, the flight service station, or if you've landed somewhere, you can also cancel by calling up the appropriate phone number. Now, this is the order that we talk to. The control sequence is like the order that you talk. So first, you're going to call up FSS or the flight service station to get a weather brief and file your flight. You can do that again through 1-800-WeatherBrief, Garmin Pilot, ForeFlight, etc. Once you've gotten your plan filed, you'll listen to the weather, ATIS, just like you normally would for a VFR flight, 12865 at Payne, and then you'll call up clearance delivery, and you'll say something like, Payne clearance, Cessna 12345, like to pick up our IFR clearance to Portland. And they'll say, stand by, advise when ready to copy, and then you will have this written out on your kneeboard, craft. And then they'll give you your clearance, your route, your altitude, your frequency, and your transponder squawk code. And you will read that back to them in that order. And when they're satisfied that you understand your clearance, they will hand you off, or they'll tell you to talk to ground. And then you'll contact ground, in this case 121.8, and request permission to taxi to the runway. Excuse me. And then you'll go to, once you've done your run up and everything, you'll contact tower and request permission to depart. Once tower has cleared you for departure, you'll say your thing, your tail number, runway number, and departure clearance. Then they'll hand you off either to like an approach or departure or Enroute traffic control center, who will talk to you through the flight. And then when you're ready, they'll have you listen to the weather at your destination. In this case, 12865. Pick up the weather. They'll hand you over to approach, and then approach will hand you over to tower, and then tower will then clear you to land. And then they'll hand you over to ground, actually. And then you'll be good to go. And that's really the sequence that we listen to the radios, or that we talk to people here. Oh yeah, there's a zoomed in version of the frequencies. Okay, let's talk about GPS and RAIM. GPS is a global positioning system that is satellite and ground-based. The scope of this discussion isn't to talk about GPS in depth. Really, we're just going to talk about RAIM, or Receiver Autonomous Integrity Monitoring. Now, that is the function of the GPS unit that can tell you whether or not you have a good signal. Typically, you will need four satellites in view to give us a position and time, and a fifth satellite to determine whether or not we can trust the signal. That's that RAIM function. And then some systems can isolate and remove the erroneous signal with a sixth satellite. So if we have 6 satellites, we can perform the RAIM function and boot the wrong satellite and replace it. You must have other forms of navigation if you lose your GPS signal. So just like in VFR world, we use multiple forms of navigation. Don't rely on just one, because you will have a bad day if that one fails. In VFR, we've got pilotage, dead reckoning, GPS, VOR, ADF. In IFR, you've lost your ability to look outside. So use multiple forms of navigation: VOR, GPS, ADF, right? And dead reckoning, using your calculations. Now, you are not required to actively monitor your other forms of navigation if your GPS is using RAIM, but I don't think it's wise. You can make that decision for yourself. Again, I recommend using multiple forms of navigation anytime you're flying. Now let's talk about that VOR, minimum operating network. So before GPS, that's a satellite and ground-based system. The VORs are radios, very high frequency omnidirectional range radios that provide us navigational data. Now the National Airspace System is transitioning to a performance-based navigation and reducing the number of stations by 2030. The idea is that they will still provide, adequate navigation for pilots who can't use GPS, right? Pilots should be able to use the VOR to reach an airport that has a conventional approach like ILS, localizer VOR, and it's supposed to be assured within 100 nautical miles. So a key concept of the minimum operating network is to ensure that aircraft will always be within 100 nautical miles of an airport with an instrument approach that is not dependent on GPS. Now, let's just go take a look at what they look like, right? The legacy service volumes look like that. Here we go. The new minimum operating network service volumes, the low one should give you guidance from 5,000 to 18,000 feet within a 70 nautical mile radius. The high altitude ones can go up to, 60,000 and 100 nautical mile radius. From 18,000 to 45,000, 130 nautical miles. Basically, it's a cone. Remember that VORs are a line of sight. So if you are on the other side of the planet, you won't be able to see them. And if you're outside of range, then you won't be able to use them. Right. And here's the new DME, or distance measuring equipment service volumes. Remember, we talked about DME like two videos ago. That gives you the slant range distance from a station. And this is their range, essentially, from the ground up to 60,000 feet in a 100 nautical mile radius, up to 45,000 feet, 130 nautical mile radius. That's the high, and then the low is 130 nautical miles, up to 18,000. Let's move on to airframe icing. Why do we care? Icing is bad for us, right? Icing is really not good for aircraft. Early detection is critical. Anytime you're flying in visible moisture from negative 10 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius, be aware that you are likely to develop icing, and you're going to see it on your windscreen, on your wings, anything sticking out of the aircraft. It's not good. It reduces thrust and lift, it can increase drag by a ton, and increase our weight, and make it very difficult for us to maintain altitude and fly. So what do? If you encounter airframe icing, you want to activate your anti-ice equipment and then seek warmer air, either descend or turn around, get to a warmer altitude, and then if you need to, land at the nearest suitable airport. Don't mess with icing, guys. It's not good. I love these AI generated pictures so much. They're so ridiculous. Okay, I think that covers it. Yep. So in conclusion, you must be on an IFR flight plan to operate in controlled airspace. It's safe and smart to plan appropriately. Even in VFR conditions, plan your flight out. Make sure you're using enough fuel. And remember that VORs are super cool and ice is bad. Whew. All right, Q&A. I'm going to see if you guys, I don't know. I doubt anybody's any questions. Not seeing any questions. I'll stick around for a little bit if people do have questions. Draw some stuff. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I think we'll knock it off there. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Really appreciate it. Yeah, hope to see you next time.